Welcome into this week's edition of Hoist the Colors. I'm Tim Best. He's Pat Madden, and we've got quite the esteemed guest. You may know him as a member of the Giants Ring of Honor, a two-time Super Bowl champion with the Giants. But little did we know. We knew a couple weeks to get this set up. But our next guest is a pretty big college hoops connoisseur, and
Yeah.
he knows his stuff when it comes to the Big East. Joining us is none other than Carl Banks. Carl, it's great to get a football legend like you talking hoops on our show, and talking a little Seton Hall. And a lot of Big East here today. So we're grateful to have you on.
Yeah. I'm happy to be on with you guys. Yeah, I'm a huge Big East fan. I go back before you were born, when it was truly the beast of the Big East. It was like mano y mano. That's when Syracuse was in it, and you had not only the best players in college basketball, but some of the most iconic and best coaches in college basketball. So um, I came to I came to New York drafted in the 80s, early 80s by the Giants. And, Michigan State, my childhood, Michigan State, I was in high school, a junior in high school when they won the championship. And so I got a chance, and Magic Johnson and I are still friends to this day. Um, he convinced me I should go to Michigan State, but I was spoiled because all I knew was Big Ten basketball, right? And then so you come to the New York tri-state area and you hear so much about, legendary street ball and things like that. And I was still into the whole college hoops thing. And, the team that just kind of popped out um, was St. John's. But, you're watching St. John's play all these other iconic teams and these iconic coaches, and it's just like, wow, this is really good basketball, right? And so I just became kind of a Big East fan, a fan of the conference and of their players, and I just gravitated towards St. John's. But I've been following the Big East for a while, and as it relates to the Pirates, Mark Bryant, obviously Coach Shaw, Terry DeHare was one of my favorites when he played, and so I'm just a huge Big East fan, and I'm happy to see it make its way back, right? So, and I know we're going to talk a lot, and I'm just running my mouth, but just I hadn't seen Villanova up close, right, this year or the last couple of years. I have a daughter that was a graduate of Villanova, and two sons that went to Seton Hall. But I had followed Nova all the time my daughter was there, and they won national championships. So, and then they kind of, it was a little quiet on the Big East front. And then I saw them this weekend, and I'm like, man, they got some players. They got some players. And I'm sitting there, and this is the beautiful part about the Big East, too. They're all like, all of these teams in the Big East, they recruit locally, right? You look at Philadelphia's team, Villanova, they all look like they live in Philly, right? St. John's, same way, and on and on and on. So that's what's really cool about the Big East as well.
So, before we talk, shift gears to, talking about the Pirates, sort of back clock a little bit, while you were playing with the Giants, that was arguably Seton Hall's best era under, one of those iconic coaches of the time, PJ Carlesimo.
Yeah.
Did you pop into any games, not far from where the place you called home?
Yeah, so I was a Mark Bryant fan, so I got a chance to see a few of those games, and it was fun. Like I said, that era was just a lot of fun to watch in the Big East. And obviously, being local, you had um, Seton Hall, you had, I don't know if Rutgers was really doing that much during that period, but it was kind of the Big East for me is what really did it. And obviously, the Pirates being local, that was really cool.
Yeah, when I heard your interview, you did an interview with Dave at Eye the Storm podcast for
Mhm.
St. John's about a month ago, and I'm thinking to myself, listening to the interview, had Carl been drafted 5 years later, instead of showing up in St. John's starter jackets, he might be showing up in Seton Hall starting jackets. So, that was sort of the first thought I had in my
I
head
got
when
Seton Hall starter jackets dropping too, by the
we'll
way.
we'll get to that. I
Yeah,
want to we'll get to that at some point, I think. But I
yeah,
was just thinking off the top of my head
yeah.
that there's an interesting sort of the timing was
Hmm.
you get to New York as the Mullen and the Barry and the Louis Carnesecca, Bill Wennington, all
Yeah,
those guys were in place, and then Tim referenced Seton Hall's big run a few years later with the John Mortons and the Gerald Greens and the
yeah.
Andrew Gazes, and then you transition off to guys like Jerry Walker and Danny Hurley. I mean,
Hmm.
well, before that it was Terry the Hare, but then Danny Hurley comes in. I went to school with Danny Hurley at Seton Hall, so I have a couple of memories of him that may not fit this episode, but you
Yeah.
you know most of those guys as well.
Yeah, and and to bring it even more modern day, Sterling Gibbs, he and my son played middle school basketball together, and their parents were really good friends of ours.
That is actually really cool. And now Sterling Gibbs, and I was the head coach of Seton Hall Prep, which
Hmm.
makes it really tying it all in together. But
Yeah.
yeah, so let's breaking down Seton Hall's week quickly. Against DePaul, and I will give DePaul their flowers. They are a lot better off than they were last year with Chris Holtman at the helm. But Seton Hall, they dug themselves quite the hole, down 19, and then they just found a way to win the game. And Isaiah Coleman, it's like they righted the wrong that they committed against Georgetown, where they didn't get Coleman the ball with a chance to win the game. This one, they tied to send it overtime, and they pull it out for their first Big East win. What are your observations of Isaiah Coleman now becoming that dude on this Seton Hall squad as a sophomore?
Well, I think they wanted him to kind of take control. I read some of the interviews and heard some of the interviews and quotes from Coach Shah, and he really wanted him to step into that role and become the man for them. And you look at the early part of the season, it just didn't seem like they had the identity that the coach really wanted them to have. And you start to see it slowly coming around now, and Isaiah Coleman is kind of that guy, because I looked at the game they played at Villanova, and it just looked so disjointed, right? And the players just didn't seem like they were all in sync with each other. And then I think they lost one more game, and then they won one, and then it just started to seem like things started to turn a little bit, and players started to feel more comfortable with what Coach Shah is asking them to do.
And Pat, I know for you, like I feel like the bye week after getting crushed by Xavier, which we alluded to, you were there in person watching just an ugly, ugly beatdown. That bye week turned out to be desperately needed. Granted, they came out flat, but at least unlike other games, they responded well. And not only did they claw their way back because they come up short against Georgetown when they were down big, but they
Hmm.
actually finished the comeback and won this time.
Hmm.
You know what's funny? I'm going to make a parallel to uh, what happened with the Giants this season. Obviously Carl is one of the voices of the Giants with Bob Papa. You are listening to one of the best local, if not the best local NFL broadcast team when you're listening to Giants games on
Hmm.
WFAN. And Carl does a great job carrying the banner for the Giants. And he's honest about it. He knows when they're good, he knows when they're bad. I'm remembering there was a lot of talk when the Giants beat Indianapolis the
Hmm.
next to the last part of the season. And a lot of people, and Carl knows this because he's in tune with everything. A lot of people were talking about the Giants tanking the season, but then you think about the parallel to Seton Hall going into last week, and it's like, all right, what's the point? You're 5-9, you're not going to make the NCAA tournament as an at-large team, but then you find something to play for. You play for the fact that when you get on the court, like the Giants did getting on the field against Indianapolis. You go to
Yeah,
try to win the game. You're there. You're wearing a uniform. At Seton Hall, you're wearing a scholarship. At the Giants, you're getting paid a salary. The
sure.
key is you win the game, and you don't care about winning the game is reward onto itself, and whatever the quote unquote consequences are. At the end of the day, it's up to somebody else to worry about what the fact that the Giants don't get the
Correct.
number 1 draft pick.
Correct. And so if we take it just down to the college level, like you said, so Seton Hall wins the NIT tournament last year, right? A lot of people say, why did they even go in it? It's because those things and I'm catching a lot of flack for this online, but I don't care because I understand what culture means in sports, right? So when Coach Shaw won that NIT tournament, it's something for the program. It's big. It helps you recruit, right? But it also gives your players something to look forward to, and your new players to say, okay, look, we went in here, we didn't make the NCAAs, but we won the NIT, right? And our goal is to get into the tournament and to win some games there. So you're building a culture of winning, and that's important. And yeah, people say, well, how well did that work out for Seton Hall, or how well did that game against the Colts work out for the Giants? They lost a draft pick and then they lose the last game of the season. It's important. If you've ever competed in anything, it's important when you take your respective place on the field, on the court, or wherever it is. It's important. And because if it's not important to you, you're probably not going to be out there, right? You're going to find something else to do with your life. Basketball is the most competitive sport around because it's win or go home, whether it's pickup or organized. You're playing to win. You don't play just for the exercise, right? You go out basketball, you can go out on the court and shoot by yourself for exercise. If you're running with somebody, you're trying to win to stay on the court in pickup basketball. So the same mentality happens when you're in college. You're trying to win. You may not be good enough, right? In some instances, but you're definitely not taking the court to say, I'm just going to go out here. We're going to lose the game.
Let me pivot over now to, you mentioned the Seton Hall 2024 NIT team, and let's go to the 600-pound elephant in the room, and a name, of course, who has brought a lot of discussion
Yeah,
in college
yeah.
basketball cycles. A young man who St. John's has the luxury of his talents this season, and we appreciate him for a few years before that, and that's Kadari Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a thumbnail thought about what you think of Kadari Richmond.
So I saw him at Seton Hall, and I liked him because he's so versatile, right? And he's got size on him. But then I watched him early on in Rick Pitino's system, and it just seemed like he couldn't find a fit, right? And now he's really starting to come on. He's a really good defender. He's got the ugliest jump shot I've seen because he's got a hitch in it, but he makes it. But he's really good around the rim. He's a rebounder. So I mean, look, he's a really good key for St. John's. And I'm not here to talk. I'm here for my love of the Big East, right? So I like him there. I liked him with Seton Hall, and I like the kid Dixon from Villanova because he's a big that's versatile, lefty that can sink them. So I'm all in, folks. I might have a favorite team, but I'm all in with Big East basketball.
I feel like you and I are very much the same, Carl. I root for Seton Hall, but I have a deep appreciation for the. I mean, I live an hour from the Dome in Syracuse, so I grew up in the
Right.
old Big East, and I obviously grew to love the new Big East, and that's well
Mhm.
documented.
Yeah.
But to shift gears to this week, before we get, of course, we want to save the best for last, which of course, the Saturday night showdown at the Rock.
Mhm.
But now Seton Hall, they're taking on a Butler squad that is 0-6 in the Big East, and kind of in a similar place in terms of some of the losses they've taken. They've lost a couple bye games, like Seton Hall has. And Butler, they brought back a lot of talent from a team that was pretty solid last year, but it just hasn't come together. So, I mean, what's your assessment of this matchup, given that, they actually had a hard fought game at Providence Saturday night, which, if it wasn't for Chauncey Jenkins and Isaiah Coleman getting in foul trouble, they could have very well stolen one at the AMP.
Yeah. So when you look at a team like Butler, and it just shows you how much better the Big East has gotten from last year to this year, because you're bringing back players and you think you've got some synergy and that you can hit the ground running, and yet you look up and these teams have either gotten somebody out of the portal or have improved themselves by, like, a Kadari Richmond going to St. John's. But when you look at this Seton Hall Butler, and I call these fighting in your weight class, right? So Seton Hall is now fighting a team in their weight class, which this could be a real confidence builder for their program and for this season for them. Because again, like we said, it's always something to play for, but this is one where, you're fighting in your weight class. So I expect this to be a better win for Seton Hall.
Quick question, Carl. I don't know if you were at the Butler St. John's game a couple of weeks ago, out of Carnesecca.
I did not make it. I was
You
traveling.
were not there, unfortunately. I was going to ask if you got a chance to have a moment with Caitlin Clark while she was bouncing around Carnesecca for the Butler game. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there is something. Not only you playing your weight class, but you did make a good point I hadn't thought about Butler, which was that they bring back most of their team from last year. They bring back their two best players, Pierre Brooks and Jameel Telford, who any other year would be all Big East players.
Mm-hmm.
But because you mentioned Eric Dixon, you mentioned a guy we might touch upon in a few minutes. You didn't mention him yet, but R.J. Lewis of St. John's, who definitely is in that conversation. You mentioned a guy like Cam Jones at Marquette. You mentioned you didn't mention guys like Alex Hairband. You begin the season, you say Brooks and Telford should be all Big East guys, but you see everyone else, a guy like Thomas Sorber of Georgetown, who, by the way, St. John's faces tomorrow night, who came out from almost nowhere and is now not only thought of as one of the best players in the Big East, but also is getting a lot of talk as being an NBA first-round draft pick. I mean, I saw Sorber when Seton Hall played Georgetown a few weeks ago, and I left immensely impressed by the presence he put. He brought comparisons to me of names you remember you and I remember back in the day. Alonzo Mourning,
yeah,
Dikembe Mutombo, Othello Harrington.
Yeah.
He's putting out a reputation to be on a level of guys like that. So I think, unfortunately, that's sort of the boat that Seton Hall and Butler walk into, is they built rosters they thought were going to be competitive, could put them in the top tier of the Big East. But unfortunately, teams rose. Some of the teams that you talked about, St. John's and Villanova and Georgetown in particular, have risen to the occasion and taken those spots in the top end of the Big East that Butler and Seton Hall thought they had a shot at.
Well, but in a weird sense, I think watching teams that bring back players and think they've got it, and then just to see that there's another level, I think it's a good thing that your coaches are now challenged to continue to improve the roster. Even though you've got good players, you got to always look for more talent and insert more talent and play now talent, right? It's not just, okay, you got to come in here and you wait your turn, or we'll phase you into the program by midseason. You got to get play now talent because that's the new world of college sports at every level, right? So yeah, if you had a veteran squad 5 years ago, you would know where your place is in your conference. You'd be like, okay, we're gonna finish no lower than this because we got our guys of experience. And now it's not the case. So you've got to, okay, you can I guess, feel great about your returning players, that gives you stability, right? But it doesn't guarantee victories anymore. You've got to get more play now talent to insert with those players so that you just take the next step.
And speaking of easing in, to talk about one guy that's Shaw is kind of trying to ease in, but he's got a lot of potential. It's kind of like with Isaiah Coleman last year as a freshman. Jasheem Felton. He's been playing really well over the past couple games. He had 11
Yeah.
minutes logged against Providence, but played solid. But I think, and you probably agree with me. I think over these next few games, including against an opponent like Butler, this might be a good time to, he started him, but now you got to, pull off the reins a little bit and kind of just let him go and trust, even if he's making a couple of mistakes, let him play through it and see what he really is as a player in year one.
Yeah, again, you're fighting in your weight class, right? So this is the time to put him in there and let him take his swings. I think I saw, did he play a little bit in that Villanova game?
Not much.
I
Yeah,
thought if somebody
not
was in
much.
there, and they just didn't look comfortable in it, and they were in and out of the game. I thought that was him. But yeah, now is the time. Like if you really want your guy to come along, put him out there against a team that he should be able to compete eye to eye with and see if he rises to the occasion. I mean, the 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 mandate is that you do right because this is the expectation. We want you to go out there and excel. So don't shrink, right? These are guys that you can play with or be better than. Don't shrink when we put you in. Go let it all hang out.
So now I don't know if Tim's ready for this. Let's talk about Saturday night.
Yeah.
Prudential Center, Newark, New Jersey. I don't know if you've ever caught a game at the Prudential Center,
I have.
Carl.
Yes.
But you want to talk about I Seton Hall's played at the Prudential Center for the last 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, as someone who's been obviously a fan all that time, I don't think I can count on my hand the number of games that are going to be bigger in terms of the emotion walking into that game Saturday night than this one, in part because of Kadari Richmond. But the other part is how well St. John's is playing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is probably, I don't know the last time St. John's was in this type of position where they're all but guaranteed an NCAA tournament bid. They're playing for a ranking because they didn't make the rankings, and they're also in contention for a Big East regular season title.
Mm-hmm.
Second place in the conference. They haven't played Connecticut and Marquette yet, but this is the type of game that, in theory, it's hard to say. I mean, St. John's is walking into this game with a lot to lose. And Seton Hall basically has almost nothing to lose except for the fact that a fan base that unfortunately is kind of depressed right now would not want to see them get shellacked on Saturday night. So, what's your thoughts about the atmosphere going into the Prudential Center on Saturday night?
Well, from a geographic standpoint, it's Jersey versus New York, right? When teams are good, when they were both good, then that you would see that kind of in the stands. But I'm not sure if you're going to see that more so than people showing up to see how good St. John's is and how well Seton Hall will play them. But in football, we have a term for what St. John's is walking into. We call it a trap game, right? So if Coach Shaw tells his team, let's just go out and just see what happens. Get a couple fouls on some of the guys, like you get Zuby in foul trouble, or RJ, you kind of lock him down. You decide which guy you want to go after, right? And see if you can frustrate them and take them out of their game. Now, obviously, Coach Pitino's a seasoned coach. He kind of is probably going to try to prepare them, but as the old saying goes, you can't legislate human behavior, right? These guys may go in there, and depending on what happens tomorrow night against Georgetown, right? They mess around and win the Georgetown game and they come in there to the Rock. They may, this may be one that it could be a trap game for them. And if Coach Shaw can get his guys, and put together a game plan where he's just out there like little pit bulls, they could it could pull off a stunning upset. It's gonna be tough, obviously, but this is a trap game. Anything's possible.
And just quickly, one name that you're familiar with, Carl, as a St. John's fan, a guy who's really got to step up Saturday night is the old Red Storm do-it-all guy himself, Dylan Adewusu. That's
Yes.
someone who he better walk into that game with something to prove on Saturday night, sort of in the same vein, sort of in the same vein as I'm trying. It's hard to compare the guy you played with, Mark Bavaro,
Yeah, yeah.
who won that ring in 1986, and then unfortunately a few years later, because of circumstances, ends up wearing the jersey of the hated Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, well, I
So,
was in a Redskin jersey too, so it was,
oh, you all okay?
believe it,
My
believe me, it was not our choice, right?
no, I
It
know, I
just
know. I'm just
wasn't
saying
our
that.
choice. And, if we had it our way, we'd be a Giant for life. But we still represented the best years of the franchise, so we were good.
So, where do you think? How do you think Wusu's going to step up Saturday night, knowing that he's playing his old teammates and knowing that
Well,
he can stick it to the old school?
yeah, well, look, to be a great opportunity, right? For him to show up and show out. But he gives them a chance, right? Yeah, you can go in and just say you're going to just compete hard, but you should have a chip on your shoulder. You should absolutely walk into this game because it's a big game, right? And you should walk in with a chip on your shoulder and say, I'm going to make you guys regret ever letting me walk, right? And look, I hate to say this, but you look at the success that Saquon Barkley's having in in Philadelphia, and a lot of people say he's sticking it to the Giants. He's not sticking it to them, but it's not his number one goal. But this is something. This is an opportunity for him to really show up and show out.
I do agree with you about Wusu. He had his two opportunities last year, and I think he did. And at least the matchup in Newark, he really stuck it to him.
Mm.
But now that you worry that like year two in this, there isn't going to be as much motivation. But I mean, you're still facing your former team. He's going to have some level of motivation. But now he's going up against Kadari Richmond. It's weird how he goes from St. John's to Seton Hall, Dylan to Wusu, Kadari Richmond,
Yeah,
Seton Hall to St. John's. So you got a lot of
right.
dynamics there. And now Rick Pitino, by the way, thought I'd point out, this is another elephant in the room. He was sick with COVID when these two teams met at the Rock last year. So now the Seton Hall team now gets to the Seton Hall fans now get to see Uncle Ricky
Yeah,
in the flesh now. I
Uncle
mean,
Ricky.
that's in the Big East Twitter
He said
lexicon.
Uncle
That's what
Ricky.
he's known as.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, how do you think that might play into things? And considering Coach Shaw's had St. John's number in the regular season, but that all changed in the Big East tournament last year when St. John's took it to him in the Garden. So I mean, what do you think? How important do you think that win might help Rick Pitino strategize against Shaheen Holloway?
Well, he knows. Well, that's the thing. Coach Shaw does not back down from anybody, and he wants his team to play like that. He wants junkyard dogs out there competing, even if if you're undermanned. But Coach Pitino knows, like he knows that if you slip up, this guy will coach his guys up and beat you. Just like you said, in the regular season, they did it. And he got him going for the tournament. But in the back of Coach Pitino's mind, he's probably saying, I got to make sure my team is focused because, the more we win, I got to make sure that they don't start to not feel great about themselves. They should, but feel like, they don't have to work as hard anymore because, what St. John's has been doing, it's not like they shoot a ton from the outside. They rebound and defend. Right. So Dunlap is hurt. So they don't even have anybody that's really flushing it from outside with consistency. So they have one style that's winning for them right now, and they get their jumpers, when they can, but defense and rebounding is where they've really been good. And if Coach Shaw can, get his guys in there to battle, get a few of the St. John players in foul trouble, it could get scary.
And something else also, during the two regular season matchups that Seton Hall won against St. John's last year, a lot of that was aided by big runs. They went on a 28-0 run in Newark, and then they were down big in on Long Island and came back and won that game. So if you're St. John's, I mean, what's the key to limiting Seton Hall, especially with that home crowd involved? They'll be at a fever pitch to prevent that from happening and let the game snowball.
Well, again, what type of team, the profile of St. John's team right now is they defend well and they rebound. And they, rebound on both ends of the court, offense and defense. So they're a tough team, tough-minded team. So, if you're looking at what St. John's brings to the table, what type of team they are, right? They have a profile. Could be an advantage that Seton Hall doesn't have one right now, and they're just trying to find themselves because you don't know what you're going to get. Like, you have to be really, really focused if you're St. John's. I mean, it's always the teams that you don't expect to put up much of a challenge are the ones that can do that. And they know that a year ago, just as recent as a year ago, they got beat twice, right? And they won the game in the tournament, but they got beat twice. So there's something in Rick Pitino's head that's saying, look, don't take these guys for granted because there's a few things they can do.
And again, it's one thing if St. John's was going out to Butler on Saturday night, that would be a little, I'd be a little more worried if I was a St. John's fan. Because it's one of those situations where Butler, all that other stuff. But this is Seton Hall. This is, as much as the two teams have never really been great at the same time, that doesn't stop the fan bases from going at each other. It doesn't stop people like me from having to hear from people like Dave at the Red Storm or his partner at the Red Storm podcast who you didn't broadcast with, good old Frank in general. It's not like Seton Hall fans don't go back and forth with those guys, and they don't want to lose that game because they don't want to hear from the Seton Hall fans on Sunday and Monday. And conversely, we don't want to hear all that stuff. Those St. John's fans have been beating us up since the season started because they're winning all the time, and they're talking about Richmond and Lewis and Ejiofor, and we're sitting here like, okay, we have nothing to fight back against them. So. The fan bases have always had something against each other. The question is whether or not one team has an advantage over the other team. And unfortunately, on the St. John's side, for most of the last 10 years, Seton Hall's been a little bit better than St. John's, but now the tables have been turned going in the Saturday night's game.
So, but think about this. You brought up the Butler. If St. John's was playing Butler, well, they might look at Seton. Okay, so if St. John win against Georgetown, right? Then Seton Hall in their mind could be that Butler. Like, okay, this team is not as good as the two we just beat, right? Villanova and Georgetown. And they may take their foot off the gas. They may try to exhale knowing that, they just went through the gauntlet of, two really good teams. Do they slip up? I'm telling you, this is like I said, in the industry I played in, it was called a trap game, right? It has all the markings of a trap game. And if they beat Georgetown tomorrow night, Saturday will be a game of high interest in as far as I'm concerned, because I want to see just how mature St. John's is. I want to see if what Coach Parcells used to say, like, get used to winning. Are you used to winning? Can you accept winning, right? Is it, can you deal with that. And some teams can't. You know, when you start to hit the national spotlight, you know, you don't want to slip up.
The only time I was disappointed in that vein, Carl, was the '89 playoff game against the Rams when what was it, Anderson
Flipper
hit the
Henderson, yeah.
he hit the 60-yard pass that knocked
Yeah.
you guys out of the play. That was the only time as a Giant when you played with the Giants, Carl, I was ever disappointed in being at, we're talking about '86 when you guys
Mhm.
just, basically steamrolled everybody. And then 1990 when you guys were expected not to do anything. And then you beat the 49ers. And no one appreciates how much people thought you guys were supposed to lose that game the game against Buffalo in
Yeah.
Super Bowl 25, maybe the two best games I've
Hmm.
seen as a Giant fan. The effort that you and guys like Lawrence Taylor and Leonard Marshall and Phil Simms and the whole lot of them had to make in order to pull off those two incredible upsets and get you your second
Hmm.
Super Bowl ring.
Yeah, I mean that was hard fought, and again, when the odds are against you, and you know, with our team going against Buffalo in Super Bowl 25, they hung up 50 something points the week before that, and I mean it didn't even look close against the Raiders. So we looking at that, and you know, our coach came up with a great game plan, and we executed it. Um, we knew, you know, the game before that also was, you know, won by field goals. But we weren't going to let them score. They weren't going to let us score. But we just kept making sure, our offense kept making sure we had opportunities for field goals. If they, you know, if they couldn't get in the end zone, they were going to make sure our kicker had, you know, was in range.
And I think, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned the game plan. I think that's a perfect segue to ask you, in terms of the game plan for Shaheen Holloway, in order for them to pull off this huge upset, if we're keeping it real, what kind of game plan would you think that he needs to implement in order to, take down St. John's for the fifth time in a row in the regular season as the head coach at his alma mater?
Um, you know, because his talent hasn't quite gelled yet, right? I guess that's fair to say, but effort doesn't cost you anything. You don't need a lot of skill for effort and to play defense, right? So if you put out more effort, and I mentioned earlier, try to get some of their guys in foul trouble, right? And I think strategically he can create some chaos. And I think he has to create chaos in order to give his guys a shot. Um, and I think they could be good in the transition game too. The ball has to move.
I could agree with that. I mean, the converse point, like, oh, it's a great idea to, like, yeah, get him in foul trouble, get to the line. But yeah, I also have to think of mine. Oh yeah, at one point we were the bottom five in free throw shooting percentage in the country. It's a
Yeah.
bit of a double-edged sword, but they have been better. I will give
Hmm.
them that. I hate them nitpicking, but, like, I mean, it's just a fact of the matter. But I think the home crowd, I think it's one of in the NFL, home crowds are important, but
Hmm.
I would argue that college sports, in at least in North America, there's no sport, no professional
You're
sport
absolutely right.
that can match it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There, it is the purest form of fandom, college sports, right? There's one interest, and that those guys are the fans are rooting for those guys on the field. They're not rooting for any other reasons. They're right there, and they show up in droves. You know, it's their activity.
So, I guess, I think the overall assessment before, we hit the last part, you have to talk about what you're repping on your head with the cap. Game prediction. Now, let's talk about, I think the Butler matchup. I really think they can win. I mean, we'll talk about, we'll hit Butler first, and then more in depth on the St. John side. I think Butler. I think they're going to be a little hungry. I think they're desperate at this point for a Big East win. I think Butler pulls it out, but not by much. Um,
Wait, so you're thinking Seton Hall is not as desperate?
oh,
I mean, think
and
about this.
Well, I
Anyway,
mean,
like you're like, don't discount Seton Hall to the point to where they can't win in their own weight class because another team is more desperate. The one thing I do know about Coach Shaw, he will make his kids compete, right? And so if you got a team in your weight class and you're saying they're desperate, well, I would like to think, that Seton Hall, given their record, should be just as desperate not to let Butler win a game.
that is, yeah.
Oh, Tim, you
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 got
got
you
you
got me
got
there.
schooled by a guy who should be in the Hall of Fame. So
Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, it
listen,
sounds great when you
you
say it,
melted me,
Tim.
man.
No, but it sounds great when you say it. But when you drill down and you examine the DNA of the head coach of Seton Hall, you know darn well if he's in his weight class, he's gonna play just as desperate. If there's one slice of bread, he wants his team to have it and not Butler, because that's just how he is, right? So they can come in as desperate as they want. They can take the court as desperate as they want. If there's one, like I said, if there's one steak or if it's one slice of bread, Shaw gonna convince his guys, hey, those guys over there, they want to take what's yours. And we're
now I'm
just as good as
remembering
them.
I'm remembering a few weeks ago when the Giants played New Orleans.
Mhm.
As sort of an example. You had two. I think New Orleans. I don't know if New Orleans still had playoff hopes going
Yeah, they
into
did.
that game against when unfortunately the Giants just couldn't find a way to make the one play offensively that might have
Mhm.
given them the opportunity to either tie it or take the lead in a game where New Orleans really didn't play very well that day, and the Giants were making one of their more concerted efforts late in the season, and unfortunately they just couldn't execute.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of parallels going into a game like this. Now, Indianapolis, the week later, should have been playing a lot harder because Indianapolis still was in
Mhm.
playoff contention going into that, next to
Mhm.
last game of the season at the Meadowlands. But I think there are parallels when you got two teams that are
So
basically,
Patrick,
yes,
you're exactly right. So you talked about the Indianapolis game, right? And we talk about one team being more desperate than the other. Indy had something to play for, right? Their bigger picture was the playoffs. The Giants were only playing not to be the first team in 50 years to be shut out at home for a whole season. So they were playing for something. The prize was a little different, but you see what I'm saying? Desperate times require desperate measures, no matter who. Like, I don't think Indianapolis laid down. I just think the Giants came in and they were hungry and they took what's theirs because they did not want to be the team that, lost all their home games.
right. And there's something to think about with Butler tomorrow night or Wednesday night
Mm-hmm,
because
mm-hmm,
they don't want to, they've had a lot of frustrating. They lost a frustrating game to Villanova, who you mentioned. They
mm-hmm.
lost a little somewhat frustrating game on Saturday to Creighton. And this is they're playing in front of their home crowd. And I was out at Hinkle a couple of weeks ago. First time, if you get the chance, Carl, you got to head out to Hinkle Fieldhouse to see Butler in the flesh. It's
Mm-hmm.
a moment you'll treasure as a college basketball fan. But those fans love that team so much, and that basically it's something where they should be walking on the court wanting to win and
Sure,
forgive that crowd something because
sure.
unfortunately this whole season they've disappointed that home crowd so much this year. So I think that's something to sort of keep in the back of your mind. On the flip side, on Seton Hall side, just keep stacking up wins and
Yeah,
at least give yourself something to feel better, have some confidence.
yeah,
If you walk in with more confidence in that game Saturday night against St. John's with your home crowd, and this is the
yeah,
game of the season, if
yeah,
this is, I mean, I hate to say it, this is Seton Hall's Super Bowl
sure.
Saturday night because I don't think there's going to be any game that Seton Hall should want more than this game Saturday night. It's nothing. It's just the point, not only the local rivalry, but the Kadari Richmond stuff
Mhm.
behind it and everything that goes into it. So you got to walk into this game with some confidence. And if you play a bad game against Butler on Wednesday, you're going to have the
Well,
same
yeah,
mentality walking into this game that they were walking into like that Villanova game
sure.
about a month ago when you sort of like they've been beat up so badly that it's one thing to say, hey, we might be able to play with these guys, but they don't feel as good about themselves, and that's why
Mhm.
Villanova pulled away late in the second half of that game out at Finneran about a month ago.
Yeah, and so I bet you the Pirates would feel a lot better walking into the Rock coming off a victory on the road, right? And yes, the Butler fans, they want something, they deserve something from the eyes of the Butler players, but them ain't St. John's problems, or them ain't Seton Hall's problems, as I should say. So those are y'all problems. Seton Hall's coming in so that they can build a little confidence going back to the Rock. And that's what they should care about. Once we start as outsiders and as fans and analysts, we can say, yeah, this is something they need to do for their fans. But if I'm Coach Shaw, I'm saying them ain't our problem. This is our mission right here. And we want to get this one and then go in to Rock and defend our territory.
So, I mean, well, let's, segue into, you want to be playing well and you want to have some wins under your belt and some like good wins, which, like the Pirates, they're more than capable of getting. Is like a matter of pride. And, like 2 months from now, Big East tournament time, that'll come in handy experience wise.
Sure.
But speaking of the Big East tournament, Carl, you definitely want to touch on the fact that you'll be in the world's most famous arena with some gear that everybody will want. I wasn't alive for the starter jacket craze, but I've seen them. I want one really badly. Feel free to plug your starter jackets.
Yeah, well, again, this is all paying homage to my love for the Big East. Because starter jackets, the most iconic or some of the most iconic starter jackets were the Big East schools, right? St. John's, obviously Georgetown was just internationally known, but it was always the starter jacket. The Seton Hall jacket quietly was a real good get, right? UConn. So when you look at, if you go back and look in the archives or just pictures and you start to see the starter jackets, you'll be like, you identify an era of basketball with that jacket. And that's the beautiful part about why I'm bringing what we call it the Beast of the Big East collection, where we're reintroducing some apparel, headwear, and obviously the iconic starter jacket for all Big East schools. And we're launching it during the Big East tournament, right? And it's going to be at Macy's Hell Square. We're taking over Macy's Hell Square. So if you're coming to the Big East tournament, walk across the street and see your school. All of this stuff is going to sell out. It's just incredible. But the beautiful part about this collection is it's tied into the heritage of the Big East, and you can identify uh, with these pieces just because your school is somewhere along the line represented the Big East in the NCAA tournament. We had, and Patrick, I think there was at one point, the Final Four was all Big East teams, or
Three out
was
of
it
The 1985,
3 out of 4? Yeah,
the
3 out of
40th
4
anniversary this year.
40,
Georgetown,
40
Villanova,
years.
and St.
in
John's.
St. John's, right? So, I mean, this is what Big East basketball was about and during that period. And I think we're moving towards that again. But I just, when you look at some of the iconic pieces that were um, part of basketball and lifestyle culture, it's the starter brand. Like we were part of that whole movement.
I
No,
mean,
yeah, I mean that was something again I don't know if I owned one at the time, but I remember seeing people walking into the Meadowlands back in the 90s, when Seton Hall was a top 10
Hmm.
team, and you broke out the blue Seton Hall jacket, and you were basically telling the world this is who I root for. Yeah,
Yeah.
Georgetown, of course, was on one level, but then you and Dave had a conversation a month ago about the St. John, about basically like you would wear a St. John's, or you might wear Villanova or Connecticut to sort of counteract what those
Hmm.
Georgetown. You go in and say, you root for your Georgetown team, I root for Seton Hall,
Yeah.
or a guy like Dave roots for St. John's, and
Hmm.
somebody else comes in and wears a Villanova jacket. So it's that principle of you showed pride by not only were you wearing the coolest thing back in the day, but you also
Hmm.
showed pride in who your team was by going out and wearing one of those jackets. So I think
Yeah.
that's something which, given this year, given the big brands are doing better this year, St. John's, Georgetown, Villanova are all having good seasons. And I think it's also something Seton Hall fans also hunger for that,
Yeah.
hunger for
Yeah.
something which
Hmm.
they can put on their shirts and say, get, and it's also working. I know it's not an NIL thing per se, but there's a parallel to that, which is that you want people to want to wear their colors.
Hmm.
uh the NFL in particular does a very good job with the NFL shop about
Hmm.
promoting wearing, your team stuff. You want to wear Giants gear, you want to wear Jets gear, and whatever the
Sure.
situation. So I think there's a good parallel to that with this effort you're making to bring Starter back. Starter is back, but
Hmm.
now this is a time where people can log into it. And
Really
I think
rap. Yeah.
the Big East
And
tournament's going to be great for that this year, because I think the Big East tournament, particularly with teams like Marquette, Connecticut in the top 10, and St.
yeah.
John's being back to being relevant, I think you're going to do very well with that. And I would encourage anybody going to the Big East tournament. I have a big Big East following on my Twitter site. If you're going into the city, make sure you hit Herald Square. Make sure you check out the collection that Carl is promoting, and go home from New York with one of those starter jackets. You'll be the envy of your neighborhood wearing
Or
one of
go
those.
back into the game wearing that starter
Right, of
jacket.
course.
So but yeah, I may post a few pictures of the Seton Hall stuff tomorrow or Wednesday when I'm back in the office. We got some of it, and it's some really cool stuff. So I really appreciate you guys allowing me to kind of chop it up about basketball and my favorite conference outside of Michigan State, the Big Ten is the Big East. So I'm enjoying this season, and just looking at all the players, and it's getting back to where it was, where every team had some really good players, and you showed up to see how your team would play against them and how your best players would be in those games, big matchups.
And of course, it also helps, back like it was back in the glory days of the conference. It's a basketball centric conference. Don't get
Yep.
me wrong. Football is great and all, but like when you don't see this anymore of a basketball
Right.
centric conference, and that's what makes the
Yep.
Big East unique. And of course,
Yep.
what else makes it stand out? Having the conference tournament in the world's most famous arena.
That's
Big,
right.
the Big Ten tried it, and it
Yeah.
didn't work out for them because the Big East is king. And of course, before we send you off, I'm assuming you're going to be helping out in Herald Square, with this gear. I mean, how excited are you to see all these fan base from all these walks of life, even for the Midwest, for the first time?
Oh, I'm excited about it, but I didn't even get into it. So our big Beast of the Big East collection, yes, we're dropping that, but we're also we're right now having discussions with Big East Rewind podcasts for them to be a part of our activations and bring in some of the Big East legends to do some, fireside chats and roundtables. So that's part of it. Another part of it is you mentioned NIL, Patrick. We are working with collectives. We are working with the Seton Hall Collective, and part of that, we're going to be doing some photo shoots with some of the legends to be part of this whole program, and also to have them part of the activations at Macy's Herald Square, where there's a sit down, and these guys get to talk and reminisce over some of the great times when the Big East was beast.
You're getting me way too fired up, and I'm not even going to be there. But now I want to
You
go. But
should. You should
yeah,
want to be there.
I didn't go last year because finances were a little tight, but at the same time, I mean, my grandmother had passed, like a week and a half
Yeah.
prior to that. But I mean, I was out in 22 and 23. Might have to make a return, and I mean, the incentive is going to be getting myself a starter jacket,
Yes.
and some other gear. So, Carl, we can't thank you enough. It's funny to get a football guy chopping up hoops with us. But listen, if you know ball, and you certainly know
Exactly.
ball. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank
And
you
we
guys.
really look forward to, obviously the game's happening this week, and of course, seeing all the
Yep.
great line of the Big East merch you're going to be putting up in a couple weeks in the city.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
So that's going to do it for this week's edition of Hoist the Colors. For Pat Madden and our special guest Carl Banks, I'm Tim Best saying, until next week, we're Tetonia.